Hi, I'm Josh. I'm from Xbox Live, and this is Josh from Xbox Live, where I am YouTube's foremost advocate for bald representation. And I don't care what race or what gender you are. If you're bald, you're a friend of mine, you're beautiful. Check your inbox for the invite to my special Baldies Only birthday party. And today I want to talk about my all-time favorite representation of baldness in media. It is Jim Carrey's The Mask. No, sorry, not not that. I'm talking about the 1994 masterpiece called The Mask, which is the first in Jim Carrey's trilogy of greenness, which is up there with Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and Pasolini's Trilogy of Life as one of the great, all-time great cinematic trilogies. The Mask is probably the second best Marvel film after Howard the Duck. Of course, everyone knows that. But I rewatched it the other day, and I caught myself thinking what exactly The Mask represents in this movie. So the crude answer to what The Mask represents is that it's a manifestation of the monsters we become when we do cocaine. That's just an allegorical reading of the movie. This means that, right? One to one. I say it's crude because it is. It's very shallow. There's not much room for you to think about anything in there. To me, that's boring. It's kind of a pointless interpretation. And yeah, there's a truth to it, right? Because when you do cocaine or huff glue or get drunk and go out and party, you are outrageous. You're uncontrollable. You're also abrasive and completely self-absorbed.
She is so coy.
I love it!
Okay, but here's the thing. That is not the case when Dorian, the villain, puts on the mask. When Dorian wears the mask, he becomes entirely humorless, vicious, sadistic. He has a plan, and for some reason he has a reptilian tongue. I wonder what that's about. So at a casual glance, it seems that a more deeper answer to this question about what the mask represents can be found in the film itself. Okay, so there's this character whose name is Dr. Arthur Newman, and this scene serves no real narrative purpose, except to answer this question, and to give the modern viewer a sense of the thematic contours of Stanley Ipkiss's situation.
I'm talking about mythology, Mr. Ipkiss. This is a piece of wood.
This character is a psychiatrist with the name Arthur, right? Like King Arthur, which to me recalls the sword, which represents wisdom, and in the tarot, sword is air. It's the air sign, it's thought, which emerges from the depths of water, the depths of feeling and introspection. So even his name represents him being this sort of modern figure with knowledge and insight on the interiority of mankind. In the extremely unlikely case that you have not seen this great cinematic masterpiece, The Mask, just to give you a very quick recap, Stanley Ipkiss comes across a magical mask. When he puts it on, he turns into a cartoon character with limitless power. But instead of using these powers to fight crime, like your typical Marvel hero, what he does is he uses these powers to have a good time and to get petty revenge. And to have, sort of sexual adventures and things like that. He's having a gay old time, basically. What we learn later in the movie is that the particulars of this manifestation, of this creature, the mask, is an expression of Stanley Ipkiss's own inner repressed desires.
If deep down inside you're a little repressed and a hopeless romantic, you become some sort of a love-crazy wild man.
So this lends itself to a very simple Freudian reading.
We all wear masks, metaphorically speaking. We suppress the id, our darkest desires, and adopt a more socially acceptable image.
So it's the id, in the trinity of the id, the superego and the ego. So putting on the mask is like letting the id take control, and so it's a very, very bad thing, and you don't want to ever put the mask on. Now that may have been the end of the story if it weren't for the Dr. Arthur Newman scene.
Bueller?
Ipkiss comes to him with this problem. 22-year-old Cameron Diaz wants to go on a date with the mask, so she asks Stanley to set it up. Okay, so now he has a problem.
Do I go as myself or the mask?
Go as yourself and as the mask. because they are both one and the same beautiful person.
Now, if the writers of this film were deliberately creating an allegory about human psychology, then that would be the end of the story, regardless of what kind of psychology you subscribe to, whether you're a Freudian or a Jungian or a Deleuze-Guattarian or whatever. As individuals, we are composed of multitudes. We have different aspects within our psyche, warring for power over us. Your shadow, or your dark side, or your id, is not something you can just destroy or repress forever. It's something you have to understand, you have to face, and eventually you have to integrate into your personality. So yes, you do have to become one with your mask, right? Now, here's the problem with that reading.
My book is about masks as a metaphor, Mr. Ipkiss.
In the logic of this narrative situation, doing that is impossible. He cannot go as both Ipkiss and the mask at the same time. They are two different personalities. Either he has the mask on, or he doesn't. There is no possibility of integration here. There's a wide gulf separating the two, and there's a Tasmanian devil animation that functions as a barrier between one and the other. So after Newman gives him this
Bueller,
irrelevant and ineffectual
Bueller,
advice, he disappears from the movie, never to be mentioned again. He thus represents our completely understandable and inescapable urge to project modern notions of psychological motivation, interiority, and ideology upon pre-modern literary figures or archetypal energies, or, if you will, the divine.
Bueller,
Because Newman does give us another piece of the puzzle. Here's what he says.
Possibly a representation of one of the Norse night gods. Maybe Loki.
The quote-unquote Norse god of mischief.
Loki?
Now, calling Loki a Norse god of mischief is itself an absurd oversimplification, and maybe a dishonest way of saying, you know, we low-key don't actually really know that much about Loki. It's extremely ambiguous what Loki's role actually was in the Norse pantheon.
Who's Loki?
Rudolf Simek calls him a god without a function. But there are a few things we do know about him. For example, we know that he was bound in fetters and he was guarded by snakes.
Not to be taken literally.
So the new
a
man,
metaphor.
Arthur Newman, is wise enough to draw the parallels with ancient mythology, but not quite wise enough to draw the right conclusion from this parallel. What he misses is that this right here, this is not the mask. This is not the mask that he's talking about when he says things like,
We all wear masks, metaphorically speaking.
no, what he's talking about when he says that is this. This is the mask. When we laugh in a false way to please other people, or, you know, when we fulfill the role that we're supposed to fulfill at our workplace, Newman is really talking about the sociological function of the psyche and how the masks we wear are determined by our social environment. But what we're calling the mask is not that. This is something so different. This, we might say, is something more spiritual, or maybe we should say demonic, because this is basically demonic possession. This is archetype possession. Jungian scholar Robert Moore sees archetypes actually as dangerous forces which can take possession of a psyche and bring it into an imbalance and make it spiral in self-destructive behavior. So I always find it funny when people say things like, oh, I identify with the hero archetype, or I identify with like the lover archetype or whatever, because it's like the whole point is to not identify with the archetypes. The whole point is to bring all of these energies into a balance to create a healthy psyche that can navigate every situation. When one archetype takes over entirely, you become a monster. Because whatever register we're speaking on, whether we're speaking in terms of mythology or whether we're speaking in terms of psychology, the archetypes are impersonal forces. These are inhuman forces. These are forces without morality that result in antisocial behavior that is detrimental to the self and to the people around you. So this is why thinking about the gods and how gods are represented in media is really complicated and tricky, because it's a mistake to think of gods simply as individuals who have a complete balanced psyche like you or I. They are not. They are fragments of a psychology. They are one aspect of a balanced psychology that has been given demonic autonomy, and they are fundamentally inhuman for that reason. They are out there looking for ways to manifest in the world through us, through our behavior. So that's why the answer at the end of the film is not to integrate the mask, it's actually to get rid of it, it's to throw it away. Only fools, psychopaths, and animals would actually seek to hold on to these inhuman, imbalanced forces. Except Ipkiss does kind of integrate a bit of what he learned from wearing the mask, right? Okay! And he gets good things out of this episode of imbalance, right? He gets the girl, and presumably that closet full of cash is still there, right? He kind of got away with robbing a bank. That's pretty awesome. So how do we square the circle? So I think the answer is to think of Ipkiss's interaction with the mask as a kind of initiation ritual. So Robert Moore and other people talk about how we live in an uninitiated society. We live in a society that has done away with all initiation rituals, which would prepare individuals for adulthood and let their childhood selves die. Often these rituals involved symbolic, at times literal dismemberment. So you might think of imagery of dismemberment being an echo of this idea of initiation, of passing from one identity into another. But the point is that Stanley Ipkiss is the average man in North American or Western consumerist, permissive, capitalist society.
You're Mr. Nice Guy?
Yes!
Stanley Ipkiss is an uninitiated man-child. He has grown physically, but he hasn't grown psychically. He's limp dick, okay? He's intimidated by beautiful women. He is victimized by his boss, by his landlady, by the police. He has no inner authority, no sense of self, no sense of fashion. He works in a bank, for God's sake. He's an NPC. So he's all the way on this side of an imaginary spectrum. The mask is sort of an evil mentor figure. And the reason it's evil is because we live in this uninitiated society. So these initiations have to take the form of monstrosity in order to be effective and to get our attention. So the mask is on the exact opposite side of that spectrum. He is a caricature, an exaggeration of the potentials hidden within this man-child. Relying on the mask in order to access this part of himself would be a trap. So the solution is to learn from this experience, learn from this monstrous version of himself in order to see what his potentials are, but to move past it, to willingly, of his own volition, take the mask off and throw it away. What's most interesting to me about the screenplay is not how Ipkiss gets the mask back at the end of the movie, puts it on, and kills the bad guys with his superpowers. That part's kind of par for course. You're expecting that to happen. The part that's way more interesting to me is how, in order to get there, Ipkiss had to dig deep and rely on the help of his friends, but he had to dig deep into his own inner reservoir of strength and rebellion and authority in order to do what was right. And yet the twist here is that he does this in his own way, in a way that is still true to him, still has his sense of humor and his charming Canadian politeness. So to think mythically about this, we need to allow these forces to remain external. If you read an author like Roberto Calasso, and I think you should, but you'll see phrases along the lines of, being drunk on Aphrodite, as though Aphrodite were not simply, a metaphor for internal states of arousal, but it was something that you consume, something that enters you from without and changes you. So Stanley Ipkiss is not merely allowing his inner repressed self to emerge, but he is becoming drunk on Loki. So to think mythically, I really think writers need to allow themselves to invent situations like this where the problem cannot be reduced to a psychological metaphor, where the mask is just the id or whatever, doing cocaine. Allow the narrative logic to take over. Allow the narrative logic of your own story to show you the way forward. Allow yourself to come up with situations where there are entities that have obscure, inhuman, and immoral motivations. Loki doesn't need a purpose, and orcs don't need families. Thank you for listening. I have so many ideas for videos and very little time to make them. Check the description. I'm going to put a list of some ideas for videos I have. If any of these catch your attention, please comment, because I'll prioritize those ones. I really value your input. I love you.